Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about the most common way that managers make why managers make programmers quit. So let's get into it. Basically the question in question here is, all right, Frederick, what's from your perspective the most common reason a manager produces a problem that makes a developer want to quit their job? So this is a kind of wide one, like the most common one. At least like I can only base it on, of course, the things that I've seen that has made programmers quit and done so fairly consistently. But it comes down to just really, in general, if we're going to be, because the question kind of indicates that there is a person or something within the organization to blame here. And I mean, people quit for more reasons. I will tell you this, I will make a statement and I will state that usually a person does not quit for one single reason. And if they do, I very commonly see that they are very special cases. Let's just call it that. Because sometimes, I mean, I have dealt with people who are like, I can't even imagine how they survive by themselves. They have very unreasonable expectations on what work life. They have, in my opinion, what I call a fairly big amount of personal immaturity. They behave in a way that very clearly indicates that they haven't been around the block. They haven't seen enough, and they emotionally need something from the industry or from work life that simply is not the common case for most people. And it's, I'm just going to be blunt and say it's kind of like watching a spoiled rich kid who behaves in a way that isn't like in line with how the actual world works. So it's not usually, as I said, it's not this happens, but if we're going to just blame a like management type, like having that perspective, it gets a little bit trickier because, as I said, it's not usually the case that it's just one thing. But the biggest contributing factors as to how a manager gets a developer to want to quit or to actually jump projects comes down to one or two things, I would say. Now let's get the obvious one out of the way first. If you are an absolute douchebag, and this is very rare, if you have a short temper or if you have, it might be more common in certain areas of the world where you have a different work culture, but I've only really had to deal with one manager who actually, it's like the classical, it was almost kind of comical. Well, it wasn't comical, but because, this was a person who, she literally made all of the people feel like absolute shit. It was very clear that this person was more about her career than she was about the team. She didn't give a shit about the team, really. It was just a way for her to impress her bosses, and the only thing she really cared about was making sure basically that she herself looked good in front of the higher ups in the company. And we had an incident where she literally yelled in front of the entire office I just completely went ballistic in front of tons of people at once, one person, and just basically shooed him out in front of tons of people. And yeah, so that was pretty much it. And having such an individual, as I said, you have varying degrees of people when it comes to management. They are either fairly immature or they have they're easy to anger, things of this nature. They do exist, and I'm sorry, I would like to say that they are rare. They are rare-ish, at least for me in my life. Maybe I've just been lucky, but they do exist. So that's one part of it. You just have somebody who actually treats people very, very poorly. But I would say that what's the most common thing that makes people quit is it's not always directly connected to the manager themselves, but they create the situation through basically inexperience and having a poor understanding of how the process of software development works. So one of the biggest mistakes with IT, and it very clearly shows in a manager if they understand how programming really works and how software development really works. The differences between having a manager with a technical background and having a person with real experience from real IT companies and just some person you took in from a completely different industry and put them in the IT department will show very quickly. Because in IT you have different considerations as opposed to quite a lot of other departments. And as an example, I had an old manager, and he was one of the higher ups. And this person was pulled in from KFC, nonetheless, into our IT department because, you know, programming and working for KFC, and that's pretty much the same thing, like managing people. Maybe it was a good move, but it was very clear that after a few technical discussions that this person had absolutely no understanding of the process of software development. This person may have known something about managing people, but the problem with managing programmers is that they have one thing that most people don't have, especially not in the fast food industry, and that is that they have a need to maintain the code base. They have a need to deal with issues because their work environment is not the same sort of work environment or rather the work environment is fairly different from other work environments. Because if you have, say, legacy code, and this is something that piles up very, very quickly and very, very quickly shows if a manager understands this. As you write software, as you deliver features, you get ad hoc decisions into the code base that come from short deadlines, or you need to cut a corner here, you need something shipped here, and so forth. These decisions, where you don't actually give the engineers the time to really solve a problem, or at the very least to go and make sure that they get some capacity or allocation to maintain the code base. This leads to legacy, and it leads to that code rot will start to slow down the project even further. And a lot of developers, most developers actually, feel a actual real emotional response to having a really shitty project. The shittier the project, the more unhappy and frustrated you will see that your programmers become. And apart from just having a shitty code base, having a shitty process where, you know, they feel as if they're either not included in the decision-making process, or they feel as if, you know, the product management don't give a shit about them, and, you know, they're just supposed to kind of sit there and take whatever gets thrown their way. That is something that affects people, and that is something that a really shitty manager or a project owner or a team leader or something like that will just kind of, you know, they will basically become a human proxy between the team and the higher ups that are causing this issue. They won't actually be on the team's side, and they won't actually push to improve things or to really hear out their programmers. And all of that, although it may not be something that they do intentionally to be a bad manager, it's something that ultimately leads to the same thing, and that is that you get the programmers to feel like this is a shitty project, it's a shitty company, and nobody knows what they're doing, and we have no leadership, and they start losing faith they start emotionally distancing themselves from the company and the project. And when you get to that point, you're all but fucked. Because when that happens, you can't get that back. When you get to that situation, it's what we call the broken window problem. If you have one broken window in a building, that's not nice, but the problem with leaving it is that then there's going to be a second one, and then a third one, and then a fourth one, and before you know it, there's so many broken windows in the building that people just, you know, they emotionally just let go of the building. The only way for you to actually get people to reinvest and be happy to live in that building is to tear the whole fucking thing down or completely redo it. And that is a very similar thing to what happens when you have a really shitty manager who doesn't understand how the process of software development actually works and how programmers actually like what they emotionally need to be happy with working at a project. So what I want you to take away from this is basically that apart from having a manager who has like a really low, like has like anger management issues or a lot of pride or things of this nature, I would say that the biggest reason as to why a manager causes somebody to leave a project is that they simply don't understand how software development works. They behave as if it's just as any other business, and it's not. And that ultimately leads to that the code gets worse and worse, and the programmers feel like their voices are never heard. They feel like it doesn't matter if they hack shit together, if they do a nice implementation. It doesn't matter if they work hard or if they just come into work and just sit at their computer. Nothing matters. And that means that they emotionally lose interest. They just distance themselves from the project and from the company. And at that point, the code will just keep on rotting until such a situation that you can't basically get anybody of any value to want to work on that code base. And ultimately that leads to real actual problems for the company, and having people leave is just one manifestation of that problem. So when you're hiring managers, and if you see that you have quite a lot of churn rate when it comes to keeping developers around, odds are that you have a really, really big problem with the code base and likely the managers who are in charge of these projects. So it's a very easy thing to spot if you're actually seeing these issues. If your time to market is really, really slow and people express frustration more often than happiness, and you actually have people leaving quite often in the engineering department, shit is going in the wrong direction. Have a great day.